And welcome into Vertical Pursuit, the podcast and videocast, which is on Spotify, iTunes, the Vertical Pursuit app, YouTube, where else? Oh, then I talk about the website. Verticalpursuit.org is the website if you want to go there. Vertical Pursuit has existed long before the podcast. The podcast came along because we were 3 years of procrastination and finally started it.
Dreaming about it, procrastinating.
Yeah, but you had built this whole thing. And you wrote the book, and then we just decided to come in.
Yeah,
we decided to come in behind that with a podcast because, I mean, I used to be an NBA broadcaster, a TV broadcaster, and so I do a whole lot of things in my life now that I'm not really good at. I'm trying to figure it out. But this is something that talking and having these conversations a lot of times.
Well, I'll tell you right now.
Out in the middle of nowhere, now we're kind of doing it to where we think hopefully it helps, and we hear that it helps, and we hear people like it, so we're going to keep doing it.
We're hearing, so I thank you. And this goes back to a vision you had was, and I know if you've listened to us on these podcasts, you've heard this story, but I think it's important to remember, like, this is birthed out of relationship, you know, and a common bond that we share with men and women out there, but I know we've unapologetically said we're talking with men. However, again, I've had so many women who are saying, thank you for the podcast. It is speaking to us as a female audience, but it's also speaking to us indirectly because, man, my boyfriend, my son, or my husband, they're listening to it. It's helping him. Because it's helping him, it's helping us in our relationship. And so it's kind of blessing everybody. But it started with that vision, you know, years ago, you and I sitting around the campfire with Jim and then finally you've been so good at being persistent with a vision of like, man, there's an audience out there that need to hear these conversations. And so here we are. Episode what? Is this 15? Episode 15.
15.
Wow.
Yeah. More to come.
Yeah.
For sure. We were talking before the podcast. You were talking about the shirt I have on.
Yeah.
And so,
okay, what's the deal?
So and I'll get to why this matters. And this was not originally going to be like an intro, but this is kind of how this thing goes. We just kind of wing it. Stuff comes to our heads. But Fenceline West is a brand that Nick Livingston and I and a guy named Mike Brown started, and David Ward is involved with too. Those guys are sometimes here. They're not today. Colton Myers is back in the back, the newly married Colton Myers.
Yeah.
New and improved, I should say. But we started this shirt brand just because we love creating. So Nick and I do a lot of content for companies, a lot of commercials. I do a lot of radio commercials for some companies. And so we're always designing stuff anyway. And we thought we're always very discerning on, we see a cool shirt or see, you know, we get involved with a brand like Traeger or like Yeti, and we love that kind of stuff. So we started making shirts. So anyway, I have to remember, I gave Colton the website. We're on Instagram. Fenceline West Brand is our handle on Instagram.
Yeah, these T-shirts are amazing.
You
guys
sure.
designed
and we have
some pretty
hoodies
sick shirts.
FencelineWest.com is. And I'm not. I know this looks like just a shill, but and that kind of is. But it's also. I started thinking about the reason we do this stuff, and the reason we dress the way we do, and oftentimes, I mean. Jerseys, you'll see crowds with NFL jerseys, NBA jerseys, clubs, all this stuff. It's all about identity.
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't oftentimes, not everything I wear says what I stand for or says what I believe, but sometimes, and you know, you've talked about, and this is at a little different level. Your daughter's done some of this with shirts and sweatshirts.
Totally, absolutely.
The Not Today Satan and a couple other things.
And Overcome and
Yeah. And doesn't she have one that says Not Today Satan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites that she did.
But the cool part about that is, and Vertical Pursuit as well, is it's a bumper sticker that you wear basically, or people come up and say, what is that? And you get to tell them what it means. But you also get to tell them a little bit and share what your identity is.
Yeah.
And it seems like today, and I know when you lob out a term like identity, people immediately go, what are you talking about, gender? What do you identify as? And I said, no. I mean, a little bit.
Yeah, actually, and we might need to talk about that today.
We will. And I think that, but today, and it seems like it's becoming a greater issue today with the fact that God is becoming absent in society, at least by a lot of people who want that.
Yeah.
Therefore, people are spinning around, bumping into things, trying to figure out, who am I?
Yeah.
And why am I here? And therefore, I think for people like me, I think I have a pretty good, I'm doing pretty good at that. But then when it comes to like the shirts and stuff, even like our brand that we started and other things, wearing stuff to show people what you stand for. And it does, I think it's as much for me just to kind of be proud and identity and who I am. But the identity issue, and I purposefully sometimes don't do a lot of research on a topic that we're going to talk about because I want it to kind of come out naturally. I don't want to be regurgitating what somebody else said, even though we all do that. But the identity issue seems like the identity crisis that society has right now, getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah. Therefore, you see extremes. Social media pours gas on this fire.
Oh, totally.
And all of a sudden now, if you like something or if you follow, and I'll get that because I still have a significant amount of followers on Twitter because of what I used to be in the be an NBA broadcaster and was higher profile certainly than I am now. But people will go through and find who I follow, and then they'll say, "Oh, you follow? I'm shocked that you follow this person." I'm gonna say, "Well, this doesn't mean that's my everything." Right. But they're almost trying to figure out my identity for me, and people do that on social media
all the time.
And then they use their own pages oftentimes on social media, especially maybe Instagram more than something else, but Facebook too. And I'm not on Facebook, but Instagram I am. Whereas you want to shout to the world, "This is my identity. This is where I go. This is me at the rodeo. This is me doing this. This is me wearing my Kuiu hunting gear. Therefore, guys know who I am. I'm not to be messed with. And I do some pretty cool adventurous stuff. Wouldn't you like to be like me?"
Right, exactly.
Isn't that kind of what it's about?
Yes. Yeah, we're branding ourselves.
Yes.
At the end of the day. And okay, so this is the interesting thing. You know, both of us work with pro athletes, and one of the first things I learned was the pressure on a pro athlete to stay relevant.
Yeah.
You hear that all the time. Got to stay relevant. Got to stay relevant. Got to stay relevant. Maybe if you're listening, you're like, "What does that mean?" What means this: that popular today does not mean you're popular tomorrow. And if your whole identity is built on fame and popularity, and especially in pro athlete world, the more that you can brand yourself and produce a product which is yourself that has a certain value to it, then you're marketable. You're marketable beyond your talent. You're marketable as a person, right? So we've commoditized our identity in the culture that we're in, and you see that on Instagram, and you see that in pro athletes. And so what happens, there's this pressure to stay relevant because one day you're the big hit, you've got followers, with followers comes money and success and opportunities, and then it's competitive because tomorrow somebody else is going to be. And you see this with the rise and fall of celebrities, and it's actually tragic when you think about it, and yet we're addicted to it. It's like we love seeing the rise and fall of celebrities because somehow I think it's a commentary on our own fears and our own journey and our own struggle. And so you'll see athletes do these crazy things just to get media attention and so forth, because it's all about identity. And the sad thing though is if your identity is rooted in what you have to create, you got to maintain that. And that's crushing. I mean, if your whole identity is in how people see you and what you've earned and success and followers, you have to maintain that. Maintaining it, it's a prison. It's a shackle around your own soul. And so identity is, I mean, it's everywhere, and we don't take the time enough, I think, to think about it.
No, and I had to deal with that coming out of my last job. And I've talked about this a little bit way back early in one of the episodes, but we were a fairly high profile, at least regionally, broadcast team doing NBA games a lot. We did them all, so we're always on TV and we're always known as that. And still now when I go out, people will ask questions about things and you get recognized. Not all the time, not certainly what it used to be, but that was my identity.
Yeah.
And therefore that ends. And I think the initial days at the shock, because we were all fired very unexpectedly. And there was, some fans, there was some backlash, and it was this whole thing in this region. But I think for me, the battle was in the days after. And I've tried to explain it to other friends who've been in like one career their whole life. It's like, I've said, well, somebody walks in and says, you're no longer that.
Yeah.
And that does happen to people.
Yeah.
So now is the test. Where have you put your identity?
Yep.
I failed it.
Yeah.
And I think I was doing okay. I thought I had some balance.
Yeah.
But that was brutal, trying to rediscover and reinvent. When if I would have been in the correct place to begin with, and again, I wasn't bad, but if I would have been in the right place, that would not have been nearly the challenge that it was. But it was a huge, and you started talking about athletes who retire, athletes who can't retire, athletes who, and social media now, I don't know if it's better or worse, but they can step down or step it down by still having a platform. Right. Whereas in the old days, if they retired, they just were gone. A lot of them would hang around the team and be an ambassador and that kind of stuff and maintain some level of this is what I was, and people recognize them as that. Whereas we honor that, and we should in most cases. I'm not saying it's all bad. There are the people who that's all they are.
Yeah.
And it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
And you'll see people that are so wrapped up in that identity and what they did or what they do, especially if it involves any kind of notoriety. It is really hard to give that up. And when I've talked about this too, but when I left the Trailblazers and that, I didn't leave, I was fired, but when I was gone from that, I had the day of, I had phone calls and I had a job offer that day, and I had one 2 days later, and I had one a year later, which would have put me right back. And it was hard. It was hard financially because it would have been, I knew I was stepping into an unknown. The biggest reason, and I've talked about this, I didn't want to travel like I used to travel. I had so much guilt built up from not being around the kids. But another part of it was, and this is going to sound maybe, I wasn't this hero, but in my own mind, I said, I want the challenge of getting stripped out of this identity and then see what I do with it. Because it would have been so easy to stay in that. And I had offers. One of them would have involved a big move, and I didn't want to move either.
Right.
But
other NBA teams did come after you.
Yeah. Well, a couple of exploratory, and then one that had been for years. That was probably an offer. But I almost wanted to test myself to see. You don't need. First of all, I think it was. By today's standards, my identity wasn't wrapped up to the point where it was unhealthy.
Right.
But I was on that doorstep.
Yeah.
And I found that out in those days after, in the shock. And then this is all I've ever was gonna do since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Obsession.
Yeah.
And then did it.
Yeah.
And then it's gone in one day without any notice. That was the test of where's your identity? And I had somebody tell me, I went on it was a Christian broadcast show in Southern Oregon. It was on the Dove with Perry Atkinson, who's phenomenal, by the way. Perry's such a good dude. And I went on his TV show. And one of the things somebody had told me down there, I don't even know who it was, they kind of said it in passing. They said, well, you never put your identity in something you can lose. And I went, whoa. And I wrote that down on my phone. And I thought that is the best advice you could ever give anybody. It's advice, so we don't always heed it. Harder to live. But I went, okay, that's what I did. I put my identity in something that I could lose.
Wow.
And from a Christian standpoint, if you are a believer, and if you're not, I still think there's something in this for you. That's where I went, okay, my identity is not in my Creator and in my Heavenly Father. My identity is in something of this world that I think it's good, and it affected lives for the positive at times, but we saw how fleeting it was and how it could go up like smoke through a keyhole and gone. And so therefore, I think that was a very healthy thing for me to hear at that time. And I've tried to kind of repeat that, although I never have the time, although I do today, but I never have the time to expand on that identity crisis.
Yeah.
And the crisis is, to me, not knowing who you are,
Yeah.
but knowing the wrong
Yeah.
of who you are.
I like how you said that. Not just knowing who you are, but knowing the wrong of who you are.
And that's not great English, but that's what
that's what
the
you're
point.
saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's well said, actually. You know, you said something too. They said never put your identity in something you can lose.
Correct.
And that makes me think about how many of us are listening right now, and we're going, okay, most of us find our identity in things we can lose. Let's just list off some of those things. Well, my identity in my job.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us find our identity in our work, our job. We find our identity in the things that we've done, things that we've accomplished. Find our identity in relationships, people we know, our contacts. We're always dropping names or this or that. If I can just get close enough. And so we find our identity in that. We find our identity even in not just the accomplishments that are good, the trophies on the wall, but what about the anti-trophies? Like we can sometimes have a negative identity.
Totally.
Because of the things that haunt us, the regrets, the mistakes we've made. And so those are like the negative trophies that we still, have and are collecting dust in our heart and soul. And so you look at all those things.
It's your identity through your kids.
Yeah.
Through their athletic accomplishments.
Yeah.
And
we talked about that the other night.
Yeah. And I have lots of friends who have great athletes as kids, and they're not unhealthy, but then I look to some and you see these fights in the stands, or my kid's this and he's better than that. And then that's where your identity really is coming from your kids and his accomplishments athletically, but it is an issue.
Well, and you think about it, like, so if my identity is anything that I can lose, which we all do, let's just be honest, we all have that. So if that's true, which it is, then the fear of losing my identity leads me to being a control freak, because now I want to control all those things that I'm finding my identity in.
And you're just playing whack-a-mole.
It's exactly. Every day you're like, okay, how do I control my job? How do I control people? How do I control my success and performance? And how do I do all these things? Because if my identity's in what I can lose, I'm going to spend my whole life trying not to lose those things. And that again is the bondage. And
it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. And then not only that, I think like the worst case thing, which you have such a beautiful testimony, was how you said at the beginning of this, you wanted to test yourself on the other side of being let go of, am I going to scramble now to get back to that measure of influence and platform, whether it's another NBA team or a sports network or whatever it is, and I'm going to go right back to that. And you could have. And you didn't. And I know you had the opportunities. You're too humble to acknowledge it. But people came after you and offered you a lot of things. But you sat in that space of like, I'm going to walk the hard path, that I'm not just reinventing myself, jumping back into that circus and managing all those things. I'm going to let myself be reinvented the way God sees me. And which means you could jump back in it. There's nothing wrong with having great success. There's nothing wrong with having great relationships with people. There's nothing wrong with having a great job and performing great at those things. It's only wrong if it defines you.
There's a balance there.
Yeah.
That, not very many people have, I don't think, balanced it well. And that can go for any job. In my world, it was something I looked around at and thought, and one day I added up kind of in my head, and I had some wonderful peers who I was very good friends with, broadcasters for other team or other league executives, because I knew a lot. And then I started thinking about the ones that I aspired to be like from a personal level.
Right.
Family, marriage.
Yep.
Your relationship with the Lord, your effect on your friends.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't think there's that many that I aspire to be like. Therefore, am I in a toxic world? No, probably not.
Right.
It was my world, so I didn't know anything other than that.
Right.
But that obviously can be in anywhere in life, and in anybody's position you can have, and you can see and identify where it's negative. For me, it was, and for lots of reasons. And as you just said, and I said a minute ago, it was a test. Part of it was I was tired. I kind of felt I was tired of the travel and tired of what it was doing to me. I underestimated how much of my identity was in that.
Yeah.
I really did.
And I think you said it really well. I don't know for all of us until one of those things is taken away.
No, you don't.
Because we all say, like, oh, my identity's not in that.
No,
it's not. I'm good. And then it's gone. You go, oh, crap. My identity was all in that.
Yeah. And then over the days, over the days that follow, things you hadn't even thought about related to that identity continue to pop up.
Yeah.
And you're continuing, oh, I forgot about that. I don't get free golf now at the place I used to always play, because I would give, you give them tickets. It was all this whole thing of all of these limbs off of what that meant. But I mean, it's, to break it back down, and I don't want my story to dominate this. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to use my experience to say, to go back to the basic of the identity crisis, which I wrote this down earlier today. So, and this was somebody else's definition. I don't even know who it was. A developmental event that involves a person questioning their sense of self or place in the world. Okay, we all kind of knew that. And I think the search for identity spins out of control, at least this is my opinion, when we don't have a North Star.
That's it.
When we don't have a true north that will guide us, that's when you're going to be spinning around like a top, bumping into things, searching for an identity that doesn't exist except for in the one who created you. I'm sorry. And I've heard the testimony of people, and I've looked at some of the biggest stars out there, and you look at crashes that they've had, and some come back around, and you look at people that come back, and then they're so hard and so strong and such warriors in some cases for the Lord or for their faith, not pushing it on others necessarily, but just saying, for me, to see them discover that after spinning out of control is awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know why it doesn't take with so many.
Yeah.
And again, I was a guy who had that. It wasn't like I wasn't there. You know that. You were part of that because you were an NBA chaplain when I was there. And I would go in. I got fortunate enough to go in and watch you speak to the home and away teams every night. There was some great stuff that came out of that. So I'm trying to say I did have good balance during that. I just didn't understand how skewed and how off it was until it was stripped away.
And I think that's the reckoning in all of us, is when they're all taken away, everything's stripped away. What am I left with?
Yeah.
And can I be a man that's still standing with a firm foundation, or am I so insecure? Because I think that's all tied into this, the insecurity. And we always talk about, because I'm a nerd when it comes to wordplay. There's insecurity, and then there's being insecurity. And you talk about that North Star. And when we don't know who we are, and we're just spinning out of control, and we're trying to figure it out. Think about this. I didn't realize this till, a couple years ago. I researched somewhere, and they said how many decisions the average person makes a day. And it's like 10,000, I don't know, it's thousands and thousands of decisions you make every day. Decisions we don't think about, like, when I wake up, do I get up now or 5 minutes later? Do I press the snooze? I mean, those are little decisions. But then think of all the massive decisions we make. Where I spend my money, where I spend my time, who I invest in relationally, what I say yes to, what I say no to. And every decision we make, almost every decision we make, somehow is a reflection of our identity. So if my identity is found in the things I can lose, I'm going to make so many decisions in my life. For instance, like you, like if your identity was back into, I'm going to get back into the business and I'm going to get after that. And you could have went right back into the busy schedule, which then that decision would have pulled you away again from your family, which you said in this season you were seeing the blessing of being able to do that. And so how many of us are chasing the wrong star? We're chasing the wrong things. And not only is it affecting the decision we make, it's so pulling us off course that inevitably we might actually wake up one day with so much regret because we were chasing this identity. We actually missed out on so many other things we could have valued in life.
Completely.
And so I think this identity piece is critical.
Well, and I will say this just to kind of couch. So the one fortunate thing I had that a lot of other people don't get is I had a year left on my contract. So I do need to say that because I don't want to act like I'm trying to sound like Mr. Big. I had a runway, and thank God for that, because otherwise I probably would have, just to keep the mortgage paid, have to go. And I understand that.
That's different, yeah.
Right, and I wanted to say
taking
that
care of your
because
family, that's different.
I get
absolutely.
That. So therefore, but again, that doesn't get in the way of the main issue is what I'm talking about with the identity piece.
Well, speaking of identity, I think behind this is the bearing, and I want to come back to that because I think that's probably, and you just said that. I haven't heard you say it before, but that North Star bearing for identity, I'm going to use that. I'm dead serious
No,
on
you
that.
can't. I trademarked that.
Okay, we're going to always give you credit for it, just like I do, try to do with the rib recipe. I always try to give you credit.
I get
for
royalties for that too.
But I'm thinking about
I did rib
behind
Saturday,
the
by the way.
identity thing is a spiritual battle. And this is what I'm going to say. So here's identity shapes your destiny in life because of your North Star. North Star is a direction. It's a destiny thing. And God wants us to be so secure in our identity. The way he sees us keeps us secure. If we're chasing after our identity and things we can lose, every day it's going to be insecure. Who am I today? Who am I tomorrow? Who am I today? Who am I tomorrow?
Yeah.
It's always in fluidness, right? Which I'll talk about that. But what happens is if our identity is in who God says we are, who Jesus says we are, there's a level-headedness, security, a North Star. And what it does is it shapes the destiny of our life in a good way. It doesn't pull us off course. And I started thinking about Jesus. Jesus shows up, and God has this incredible destiny for his life, which is to save the world from their sin. Satan knew, though, if he could get Jesus off his identity game, he would derail his destiny. God has a purpose for all of us. And identity is attached to that. And when we're secure in our identity, we live out the purpose he has for us. If we are insecure and we're chasing after everything else, we're never going to live in the destiny he has for us. So what happens in the story of Jesus, right out of the gate, Satan shows up, looks at Jesus, and says these words to him. It's called the temptation of Satan to Jesus. He looks at Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus, you just came out of a time for fasting in the desert. You got to be hungry. Turn these stones into bread if you are God's son. What he was saying is prove yourself, prove your identity, prove your value. And if you do, Jesus, then Jesus didn't take the bait on that. Jesus is like, no, I have nothing to prove to you. My identity is secure in who God says I am. I don't have to prove anything to you. And what happens is Satan starts the spiraling out of control, I think, when he begins the identity thing with confusion. He wants you to question, like, who am I? Yeah. Who am I? Because when it's clear this is who God says I am, we're secure, we can live out of that, we can function and flourish and thrive in our purpose in life. But if we're spending our whole life in this state of fluidity of like, who am I today? Who am I tomorrow? I'm not sure. This is why, and I'm going to be bold and say it's what's happening with all the gender confusion in our country. And it's why what's happening in our schools, it's exactly the same ploy that Satan's been doing from the very beginning of the garden, which is to get people to not be secure in who God says they are, but to keep you in a constant state of confusion. In fact, Portland schools even just recently released their curriculum to third graders and are telling third graders, hey, there's as many genders as there are stars in the sky. So, talk about having a North Star and then talking about waking up every day going, I don't know who I am today and I don't know who I'm going to be tomorrow. And I think that's exactly what Satan wants us to do, is spinning and spinning and spinning. And this is how I feel today. This is who I'm going to be today. And what's happening is that's being perpetuated, not just in our schools. I'm going to zoom out. That's the tactic Satan's been using all along. And to keep you not having a North Star, but to get you guessing every day and then chasing down that road and then chasing down the next road. And then you're always in a perpetual state of confusion and insecurity. And that's a symptom of the world we're living in. Whether you are a man that's 60 years old and looking back over your life, living with regret, going, I was the worst dad, that's an identity crisis. Whether you're a third grader trying to figure out your gender and sexuality, it all stems into this identity. And do I find my value, my worth, my meaning, my purpose in who God says I am, or how I feel, or what others think of me, both for good or bad?
The crisis comes, just to say again what you already said, the crisis comes when you lose sight of who your Creator made you to be.
Yes.
Now to that, I read that today and I thought it was great. A lot of people then would come back and say, well, I'm not sure who I am, not gender-wise, but just who I am.
Right.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Therefore, I think you're getting your worth many times. We talked about this, I think, in episode 15 or 14. You're getting your worth from what you do, and that's a whole other can of worms, because I think I used to do that too.
Right.
But it is funny when you think about how you chase identity on, as I mentioned, social media, because I think they're there's some good things there. I mean, Vertical Pursuit's one of those things there. I mean, I've joked around about that one time when somebody said something about social media, and I said, well, if that's where people are, let's go find them there.
Right.
But I think one of the things you talk about in who you follow, what you wear, the jersey you wear, the club you go to, the golf course, and you play another golf course, and then you go to the Elks Club after, and then you got a card, and you got a sticker on your back of the car that says, I belong here. Those are all identity things, and they're not all unhealthy.
No.
But it is, we are constantly chasing that. You're chasing what defines you.
That's it.
And it even I mean, I'm just thinking about myself. I do it all the time. And I guess how to keep, and you did go through a little bit of this, how do you keep that North Star in clear view? Because one of my favorite proverbs is, a discerning man keeps wisdom in view, a fool's eyes wander to the ends of the earth. And that's one of those things, when I always think about that one, but when I think about it as it relates to identity, that's especially pressing for me. So how does somebody keep it in view and keep it clear and keep your true north and your compass from being ossified?
That's so good. Well, I'll use your jersey analogy, because we've actually used that in chapels. I'll bring in a jersey, and when I speak at FCA or any other chapels at high schools with athletes, I'll use the jersey analogy, right? When you are playing for one team, whether it's Portland Trailblazers or the Lakers, you wear that jersey when you're on that team, but then in a moment that jersey can be gone, and then it's stripped from you. Whether through trade or whether through free agent, whatever, it's gone. And then you play for another team, and then you wear that jersey. And that's that sense where that jersey represents a lot to all of us. That jersey could represent your identity is in your job. That jersey can represent your identity in your successes and accolades and accomplishments and all of those things. Your jersey can be seen in your sexuality. And that is I have a heart. My heart breaks for those like in the trans community. My heart breaks for that, because I just think that there's a whole agenda here to keep people in that state of confusion. So I know, let's change jerseys, and see which one fits. So I think what we have to do with all the jerseys, we're all play a part of this, whether my identity jerseys in my work, my relationships, my sexuality, whatever. We have to, at the end of the day, choose what jersey actually defines me, that has my best interest in mind. And it's when Jesus said, I love the Bible says that when we say yes to Jesus, he clothes us in his righteousness. And I imagine it's like Jesus is clothing, it's like he's putting his jersey over us. And when we allow that to happen, we begin to go, okay, I'm actually who I am because God says this is who I am. He loves me. He's for me. He's all about stepping into my place so I can experience his life. And so he attributes that sense of value to me. And so if I choose to accept that, regardless of how I feel, regardless of what culture says I who I should be from an identity and status and so forth, that's where we begin to rest. So at the end of the day, it's going to come down to one word. Identity comes down to, who do you trust the most? Do you trust that who Jesus says? Which means if I trust him, I'm not going to even trust myself. So when culture says, trust yourself, I'm like, I'm not going to trust myself, because if I trust myself, I might change tomorrow. This is who I feel today. And then, but tomorrow I might feel differently and find my identity in that. So I'm not even going to trust myself. I'm not going to trust anybody else. I'm going to trust in Jesus and who he says I am. And his word is where I'm going to put and anchor my identity in that.
You think and this is kind of a silly question, but do you think I keep bringing up social media, but I started watching a movie last night. I don't even know what it was. I was watching something and it ended, and then I flipped over and something else was on. And it was like an 80s. And I was thinking how much easier it was back then, before all. You're watching a movie when nobody has a cell phone or anything, and you're going, my gosh. Was it a ton easier back then? And I don't mean 80s, I mean whenever.
Right.
Before social. I think it was, and I'm as guilty as anybody about using social media and news feed and everything else. Was it easier then? Was it? I mean, have we seen a lot of this now because is that we're obviously getting more options every day in front of us about who we want to be. I mean, in just little things. Like I'm talking about the shirt, or what brand you wear, and
Totally.
That didn't used to be that way. My mom would run us down to J.C. Penney once every month, and you maybe would get something, and that's it. And they didn't have much, and so you just kind of were happy, and you went and did your thing. Now, with Amazon and everything else, it's like all these decisions based on what I'm going to be and whose team I'm on and what my identity. Am I making that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does it seem like that was so much easier back then? So much more simple?
You know, it's funny because like I know there's always words for every generation. There's days, right? Like right now, there's a lot of language. It's especially in the gender conversations. It's called gender dysphoria, right? So you take that dysphoria. What does that mean? It just means the state of being in dysphoria, confusion. I'm not sure where I'm at. Dysphoria has always been around when it comes to identity. You know, we've always been in a place of that state of who am I? Where do I get my worth and value? But I think what's happened is fast forward to the world of technology we're in now, and that your life is far more under a microscope than it's ever been, and there's far more pressure to live up and compare. I think that to me is one massive contribution to where we're at today. Like comparison is a dangerous game on a lot of levels, because what happens is if I see somebody else and they're belonging, they've got, you know, whatever, and I compare myself to them, then I'm going to try to measure up. And then I think if we're not careful, we can fall into the trap that out of comparison, I have to prove myself, and whether it's through social media or whatever. But I think it's complicated it definitely, and maybe amplified that. And I think we're all now more aware. We have, you know, like you said, it used to just be your small community, and now we're a global community. And so there's just thoughts and ideas and complexities to identity that has been an entrapment. So before I might have only been pulled into a few ideologies. Now it's like every day I'm bombarded with, am I this or is this? Am I going to identify with this or this or this or this? I mean, that globalizing that from a tech standpoint, I think can add the complexity to that struggle and confusion that we all wrestle with.
Well, and I talk about how it is today. And then yet I'll find scripture in the Bible and go, man, they were wrestling with the same stuff that we are.
Oh, totally.
And I had a friend who doesn't know the Bible well, and I was sending him some scripture, and he like wrote back and he goes, that's from the Bible? I'm like, yeah. He goes, that's exactly what we're dealing with right now in society. And I said, I know. And so a little bit, it's same as it ever was.
Yeah.
So I do think right now it's maybe going faster because of the access to information and the opportunity to maybe put a stake in the ground as this is the team I'm on.
Totally.
And that can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
It just means this is where I stand. This is my beliefs. And there's so many things that little things that now, I mean, I remember I put up a picture on my Instagram, and it's still on there. I used to, because of my association with Bi-Mart, I went to the country music. I'm a big country music guy, and went to this festival. And Darius Rucker was playing, and a buddy of mine knew Darius from Nike, and so I wound up having a beer with Darius after his show. And this is I didn't even need to tell that part of the story. Sorry, but I was wearing a shirt, a motorcycle shirt, said Triumph, and I threw it back in. Everybody's doing these Throwback Thursday pictures. This is a few years ago. So I throw that shirt up there, and then I had these commenters saying, I can't believe you're wearing a Trump shirt. And I said, well, it's a Triumph motorcycle shirt. I don't know what. Oh. But then a lot of them said, well, it could have easily have been, so I'm still pissed off at you. I'm like, really? But to go back to the shirt thing, the assumption of my identity all of a sudden, and the fact that it got blanketed out, which is my fault.
Right.
Well, not really, but on social media, it's so funny. It was such an example to me about all of a sudden now I'm cast into.
Oh yeah.
And we see that over and over again. Before I go too far into that. So for somebody who's had a past.
Yeah.
And an assumption of an identity, or even if they did horrible things, how do you rebuild that identity?
I think it comes down to,
Not you have to rebuild it, but how do you, because a lot of that stuff, especially with social media, it doesn't go away.
No. Okay, so I'll go back to this thing. Satan's job is to keep us in a perpetual state of confusion. Because here's the thing. If we are secure in who God says we are, and there's a security that comes from that, God gets a lot of glory in that. And Satan hates that. He's jealous of that. So if he can't defeat and undermine God, he wants to undermine his creation. And which is us as a human race, and he wants us to live in a place where we're always confused and insecure. And so I always use this picture, like when you go to a carnival and they have that funky, wacky mirror, and what is that? The whole point of that is when you look in the reflection of that, it's a distortion. So it's not even truly representative of who you are.
Yeah.
So you look in the mirror and it says, you're crazy wide or crazy tall or like all squigglies and all that. And we laugh at it because we know this isn't true. The whole point of that, it's a distortion, right? The problem is that Satan's whole job is to hold a distortion mirror in front of you every day when you wake up. And then you look at yourself and you see the distortion of shame. You see the distortion of regret. You see the distortion of anything else that attributes to what I would call a false self. That's the language used. That's a false self. That's not who you are. That's a distortion. My true self is when I look in the mirror of who God says I am and I reflect back his image. And the Bible says we actually reflect back his glory from day to day. And so when I look in that mirror, I begin to see the way God sees me. But if I reject and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna choose God to define my identity, you're gonna wake up every day looking in a distortion mirror. So whether you got a lot of shame and regret, your past, and that affects your identity, your success, if you're trying to get your worth out of all that, those are all distortions. It's all going to distort you. At the end of the day, it comes back to what mirror do you put your trust in the most? And I would say, if you trust that God's mirror of who he says who you are, that's where I'm going to anchor my identity. That's the only place of true security versus insecurity.
You did a sermon recently on, I think it was on that, but you opened it with simplifying. And I think we're so hungry for something that's simple.
Yep.
Because it's not exhausting.
Yeah.
And the simplicity, cutting all the crap. What can be more simple than knowing that you were made in his image?
That's it.
And that is your identity.
That is it.
I know it's a challenge to get there, but what's more important than that
That's
in
it.
terms of
Absolutely.
your identity?
Absolutely. So I would say, you have to choose. It starts with an actual choice. I'm going to choose that his mirror is my reflection. And then think about this. Every time I scroll on something like social media, that's a distortion mirror.
Yeah, it is.
Every time. And so you gotta just be knowledgeable of that and say, you know what, maybe I'm going to spend less time looking in all these other mirrors that everybody else is projecting, trying to fit their image of what is meaningful and successful and belonging and all that. So you actually have to dilute all those other mirrors in your life. And that means the simplicity thing. I got to simplify my life. Maybe that means fasting or taking some time away from those voices that you're hearing, whether it's a break from social media or just recalibrating your own life, going, I'm not going to let my job define me. I'm not going to let key relationships drive me. I'm not going to let shame and regret drive my identity.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend time in God's word. I'm going to look at all the promises that he says of who I am. And I think that's going to give us the right bearing to come back to that and the right reflection that we want to gaze in.
Keep your true north focused.
That's it.
Which is a challenge. This is a topic we could go on like 5 different, keep coming back with. I mean, there's so many arms to this thing, but anyway, we'll wrap up. It's a challenge, and I've shared my story with it only because I think my biggest challenge coming out of a massive career change at whatever I was close to 50, might have been, no, not quite. But coming out of that was my biggest challenge, admittedly. And I'm like, when did that? I didn't even know it. So anyway, I know it happens to you too. You just have to keep on the grind. And the biggest thing, and this is why the North Star hits me and the true north hits me, is if you have that in focus and you keep that in mind as something you will not lose. And that's why I love, now every time I look at a compass, I think about the true north, and you kind of see the needle do that. I go, if that's the way we could live and never let that ossify, always keep that in view, we're so much healthier and we're so much happier. And for me, we're so much more relaxed and we can rest, which sounds really nice. We thank you for listening and watching Vertical Pursuit. Thanks to Colton Myers, the new and improved Colton Myers in the back, and Nick Livingston, David Ward as well. And again, you can catch us on Spotify, iTunes, on YouTube, because it is video as well, or you can check us out on the Vertical Pursuit app, which is on iTunes, and also Android has it, and then the website is verticalpursuit.org. We'll see you next time. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast, comment, or message us, and check out our website at verticalpursuit.org. Download the VP app and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.